With their family in this memorial service. This week's portion of Shalach, talks about the spies that were sent by Moshe to scout the land of Eretz Yisrael. And we know that it has a disastrous end because 10 of the 12 spies come back and they give over a negative report about the Holy Land, about the Promised Land, about the land flowing with milk and honey. And they say, indeed, it's a beautiful land, but there are giants there, and we felt like grasshoppers in their eyes. But we also know that 2 of the 12 spies, Kalev and Yehoshua, come back with a very positive report, and they try to inspire the Jewish people to listen to them. Now the Torah describes their journey into Eretz Yisrael. They went in as 12 individuals, plural, a group. And yet there's a verse that tells us that Vaya'alu ba'Negev, they, plural, arrive, they come to the Negev. And then it says Vayavo ad Chevron. And they came to Chevron, but suddenly it switches to singular. He arrived to Chevron. And the commentaries tell us that it was Kalev alone that went to the city of Hebron. Why did he go to the city of Hebron to visit? Why did he go different than the rest on the itinerary of where they were going to tour the land? Rashi tells us, because Kalev wanted to pray at the burial site of Ma'arat HaMachpelah. He felt that he needed the strength of the avot and the imot, of the fathers and the mothers that were buried in the cave of Machpelah if he was going to undertake this mission. And it was indeed the strength that he received there at this very powerful place, the burial site of the patriarchs and matriarchs, that gives Kalev the strength to stand up to the majority of 10. We find similar in the Torah text that tells us that when Yaakov's wife Rachel passes away, he buries her on the road. Those of you that have been to Beis Lachem, to Bethlehem, know the burial of Rachel sits alone on the street. She wasn't buried in the cave of Machpelah with the rest of the fathers and mothers, with the patriarchs and matriarchs. And why was she buried there? Again, we turn to our commentaries who tell us that Yaakov foresaw a future in the history of the Jewish people. That the Jewish people would be running for their lives, and they would be going down this street. And there they would have this burial place of Rachel, a place that they can pray, a place that they can beg Rachel, their mother, Mama Rachel, to help them. And indeed it's written in the books of the prophets, Kol Barama Nishma, that a voice is heard, crying to God Almighty, my children, my children. And God assures Rachel, assures Rachel that her children will survive and they will live on for eternity. We find throughout the Torah sources, hints, especially throughout the oral Torah and especially so throughout the Kabbalah and Chassidus, of the connection that we make to souls that have left this world. Naturally, there is sadness when we lose a loved one. There is real pain, there is real emotion. And there are no words of comfort that can take that away. Because we loved someone for a very long period of time and we loved them dearly. And they had a tremendous impact and effect on our lives every single day of our lives. And that physical relationship, when it comes to an end, there is sadness. And therefore we sit Shiva, and therefore there is Shloshim. There are different periods of time within Judaism and Jewish tradition of mourning, because the mourning is real, and the crying is real. But the Torah also assures us in our faith, in our emunah, in our bitachon, that the relationship doesn't end at the grave. That there's a new relationship that begins, a very powerful relationship that begins, as we here on earth connect to our loved ones in a heavenly world. So we join together with Rabbi Shlomo and his family. There are grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the room as well. In this transition time, a time of pain, a time of sadness, a time of tears, and yet at the same time, a time where we strengthen the family and we give inspiration to those who are in mourning. that a new relationship will begin, a relationship with a neshama in a heavenly world, a relationship with a neshama in a place in which he can beseech God Almighty from up close and watch over this very special, great, large family.
Amen.
I had the schus, and I will use that word, the schus, the merit, to live 4 doors down from the Bistritzky family. I lived 390 Crown Street. They lived 400. Yes, 400? 400 Crown Street. We are 4 doors away from each other. When the Bistritzky family moved onto the block, we were 2 large families. We were the 2 largest families on the block. If the 2 families were to get together, we would need a zoning permit just to have dinner. But I have fond memories, because I was a little kid. And Reb Leibel Bistritzky was a hero to all the little kids on the block. We looked up to him. He wasn't as tall as the image of a 5, 6-year-old was, but we looked up to him as a giant. You know, there's different, when we're a child, there's various different emotions that come to mind when we see people. We kind of label people in a very interesting way. So when we saw Reb Leibel Bistritzky, the sense of security came in. We felt secure. Crown Heights wasn't always the safest place on earth. He was a protector. And you felt that protection. You felt that shield. That he will watch over the children. But there was also a very tremendous sense of warmth. Generally, you don't think of those 2 emotions coming at the same time. Protector, you think of a soldier, brave and strong. And warmth, you think of someone that hugs you and cuddles you, and yet he was both. Every single time I would pass the house, Rabbi Leibel would be on the porch a lot. And I don't remember what he called me. It could have been Brisky Jr., it could have been Little Brisky. I was quite short when I was 6 years old. Some of the fellows on the block, me and my brother Menachem, we looked pretty much the same. We were also the same height. I was Moshe, he was Menachem. So a lot of the neighbors, as we would pass by, we would always be walking together. They would simply say, Moshe Menachem. They didn't figure out which one was which. But every single Shabbos and Yontif, you would hear him yelling out, Good Shabbos, Brisky Jr., as I would pass by the house. And for me, as this little child, here is this man with a very long white beard, a hero of the community. I'm sure you'll hear more about that as the night goes on. Really a hero of the entire Lubavitch community. And I was this little kid walking by, and he would always make sure to say out loud for everyone on the block to hear, Good Shabbos and Good Yontif. Now, we did that with every single child that would pass by, and everyone felt that very special warmth and protection. But I do remember, and I remember vividly, and I actually just recently mentioned to Rabbi Shlomo this memory, and he confirmed indeed that it was correct. I remember a Rosh Hashanah passing by, and I say a good yar, waiting for the natural loud response, and I didn't get it. I got the shaking of the head. Second day Rosh Hashanah once again. Good Yontif Reb Leibel, shaking of the head. Yom Kippur, same thing. Sukkot, it was back to Good Yontif out loud. Again, from a child perspective, you remember these things. What did I do wrong? I wasn't the kid that playing baseball on the block broke the Bistritzky window. It wasn't me. Why was he upset? The next year, Rosh Hashanah, same exact thing. So I asked my older brother, Shalom Ber, who was very, very close friends with Rabbi Shlomo's older brother, Yingi. Do you think Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky is upset at me because he didn't say Good Yontif to me? And he said, Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur only davens. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't speak an entire Rosh Hashanah. So he shouldn't be speaking, God forbid, any Lashon Hara on Rosh Hashanah, and he shouldn't speak any wasted words. Any word he says on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur should be on prayer. He will not say a word in his own house. He will not talk the entire Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Heroic individuals, biblical characters. We lived on a very special block. And these memories stay with you. Fast forward. I become friends with Rabbi Shlomo, and Reb Leibel Bistritzky comes out for a Shabbos in Oak Park years ago. And I asked him if he would honor us by saying a few words in shul. He says, Moshe, don't give me any kavod. I'm just a grocer. I slice cheese for a living. Humble. No. If that's a grocer, wow. Holy individuals, holy people, humble people, giants of people. You're going to hear about this great man. You'll hear about him tonight. You'll hear him as time goes on. Because it's important for us to know the heroes from where we come. Today we look at global Chabad, international Chabad, all over the world, every part of the world. Who are those giants that brought this about? That brought about this revolution of the Jewish people, this renaissance of the Jewish people. We'll begin tonight with the reciting of Psalms from the book of Tehillim. You have booklets on your chairs. We're going to start with the reading of the Rebbe's chapter, Psalm 112. We'd like to call upon Rabbi Yitzchak Sapachinsky to lead us in the reading of Psalm Kuf Yud Beis.
Hallelujah, Asher Yish, Yore Sadina b'mitzvah Yisrael Chafetz Me'od, Giba ba'aretz Yizarei Dar Yisharim Yivayrach, Hayin v'Oisher v'Veisei v'Tzidkas v'Yemedes La'ad, Zonach v'Cheshach Ar Yisharim Chalim V'Rachim v'Tzadik, Tev Yishchein Amal v'Yichalkel Devarat Mishpat, Ki L'Yolam Lo Yimeit L'Zecher Olam Yiyad Tzadik Mishmu Ora Lo Yira Nachum Yivay Batuach B'Adinoi, Samuch Liber Lo Yira Ad Asher Yira V'Tzara Pizar Nasan Lo Evgenim Tzidkas v'Yemedes La'ad, Karnei Torum B'Chaved, Rosh Yira V'Chatz, Shinov Yacharek V'Namos, Kavas Rishayim Teved.
We'd like to call upon Rabbi Ari Greenwald, a grandson of Reb Leibel, for the reading of Psalm Kuf Yud Gimel, the Rebbitzins Kapitel.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, Adonai, hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Hishem Adonai, Natav Adonai, Mizach Shem Hashem, Vayim Shem Adonai, Ram al Kol Goyim Adonai, Ala Shemaim Kivoide, Mik Adonai Eloheinu Magbi L'Shavas, Amashpili L'Orais, V'Shemayim V'Oretz, Mikimi, Mi'afar Dol, Mi'ashbeis Yorim Evyon, Doishi Nidirim Imi Diyamoi, Meshivi Akeres Habayis, Eim Havanim Smecha, hallelujah.
The reading of Psalm 87 was from Reb Leibel Bistritzky's Kapitel. We'd like to ask another grandson, Reb Shlomo Ehrentrei, to please come up.
Livnei Karach Mizmar Sher Yusutosagari Kayesh Oyev Nadenish Eretzim Nekomish Gmesh Yaakov Nichbades B'Dor Barchi Elim Sela Askara Avavaliana Hinek Leshes Vitzarim Kosida Yulad Sham Lasian Yamar Ish Ish Yulad Bava Vichan Al Yain Ana Yispang Chsayb Amisa Yulad Sham Sela Vesharim Kefamil Karma Yanai Bach.
Psalm number 20. We'd like to call upon Rabbi Robbie Tombowski to please lead us.
Lam Netzeach Mizmar LeDavid, Yancha Drem Yom Tzaris Agef Hashem Yaakov, Yishlach Azrocha Mikadish Metzin Sedeka, Yiskar Kom Nechai Secha Elaski Deshena Sala, Yitin Lechak Levavavcha, B'chol Atzascha Yamalei. Niran Nebisho Secha B'Shem Eloheinu Nidgal, Yamalei Adonai Komish Alasecha. Ata Yadaiti Ki Aishi Adonai Mashiach, Yanei Mishmei Kacho, V'Gburus Yeshi Yamino. Ele Varecha V'Ele Basosam, V'Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Nazkir. Him Makaru V'Nafalo V'Anachnu Kamnu V'Nisodad, Adonai Hoshea HaMelech Yaneinu V'Yom Kareinu.
Psalm number 23, we'd like to call upon Rabbi Leibel Kahana to please lead us.
מזמר לדוד אדוני רעי יחסר בין אסתשי ארבית סייני עמי מנוחס ינעלני נפשי ישב יגן חיירים עלי צדק למען שמעי גם כאיך ויצא מוות לעיר רע כי עתי מדי שבתך משנתך הימין החמוני תארך לפני שולחן נגד סרד השנת בשם רשי קייסר ויהי אהבתי וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי ושעתי ויס אדוני לרחם.
As we recite the last few psalms, we'd like to ask all of you to please have in mind a baby. Baby hasn't been named, it's a baby boy. We call him Tinok, which means child. Tinok ben Ella Rachel, to please have in mind in our reciting of psalms that God should give this baby the strength to survive and to fight on. Psalm number 130, we'd like to ask Rabbi Eli Labor to please lead us.
Shir Malais and Malak and Kursi Khadana, the nation of Pikaliti, and as that Kashubas, the Kota Hanuna, and Vanis Tishmaya, the Nai, Miyama, and Kimcha, Slichal Mantavari Kivisi, Adonai, Kiv Sanashi, the Bari Hecholti, Nafshi, Adonai, Mishaven Baker, Shaman Baker, Yachal Israel, El Adonai, Kim, and Anaya Chesed, Bahabra, Miftus, will leave this as Israel, Bekola Benesa.
For our final psalm, Psalm 142, we'd like to ask Rabbi Mansuri to please come up.
مسکر داوید برید و نمرات فیلا کل ادنای مزاک کل ادنای خنان شبنا فنسخی سرد لبنا گید بنا الرخيب لمأتى لدليل مفروض إلى ختم الفخلي حب جميل لين كماكيل منس من كل نفشي زاكت إلى خدمة مرتي أتو مخسي خلقي بإرسا خايم أكشو للمرتي كدلوتي مر أسلم بمفهوم كم سمني خاص ما كان نفشي ولا شميخة بيحتاج صدقين كده كمال الله.
Thank you very much. We'd now like to call upon Rabbi Yisrael Levine for the reciting of the Keil Malei Racham on the memorial prayer.
Eila Molei Rachamim Eshoichin Bamraimim Hamet Zemenuchen Echein Al Kanfei Ashchina B'maileis Kedoshim Utehoirim Kizayar Harakiya Masirim Es Nishmas Reb Yehuda Leib and Reb Mordechai Shohalach Le'elamai Bavor Shnad Tzedok Biad Askaras Nishmasei Bigan Eden Tem Nuchasei Lachein Balarachmim Yasireu B'seis Knafiv Le'elamim V'yitzrer B'srer Chaim Es Nishmasei Adinei Hunachalosei V'yanuach Al Mishkavi B'sholem V'neimar Amen. O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant true rest upon the wings of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, in the exalted spheres of the holy and pure, who shine as the resplendence of the firmament to the soul of Reb Yehuda Leib, the son of Reb Mordechai, who has gone to his supernal world, for charity has been donated in remembrance of his soul. May his place of rest be in Gan Eden, therefore may the All-Merciful One shelter him with the cover of his wings forever, and bind his soul in the bond of life. The Lord is his heritage. May he rest in his resting place in peace. And let us say Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. It is our honor to have with us the Executive Director of Chabad of the Valley and a very close friend of the Bistritzky family. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Joshua B. Gordon.
I am not as old as Rabbi Moshe Brisky. My beard is not as white. But I will also tell you of my childhood memories of Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky. You see, I was born in my parents' home in Newark, New Jersey. This goes back probably between 55 and 60 years ago. It was late one Friday night, and we had finished our Shabbos meal and getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden there is a knock on the door. Now, my mother, of blessed memory, for whom I am reciting Kaddish now, was a good friend of Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky. They kind of grew up together. Contemporary. She must have told this story 100 times. But they opened the door. They say, "Who's there?" He says, "Leibel." Says, "Leibel who?" "Leibel Bistritzky." And in comes this unkempt guy with big boots, wearing anything but Sabbath clothes. Must be 11 o'clock at night or something like that, in Newark, New Jersey. You see, what happened was that the Bistritzky family lived on a farm in Vineland, New Jersey. That's before they moved to 400 Crown. And he was driving to Crown Heights with his truck and traffic. Maybe they had traffic back then, I'm not sure. Maybe they were fixing the 405. And Shabbos came, and he pulled the truck over to the side, and he knew that his friends Shalom and Miriam Gordon lived, and he knew the address, and he walked and got to my house, probably 11:30 at night, and of course we were thrilled and honored to host him for Shabbos. So that's a memory the Gordon family will never forget. When I was a little boy, you didn't have kosher markets like you have today. My parents used to take me to Reb Leibel Bistritzky's store on the east side. It wasn't very big, but to quote Rabbi Brisky, in my little boy's eyes, it was humongous. I said, "All these products are kosher, wow!" Because there were no kosher stores. And this was the big excursion. And my mother, of blessed memory, would tell me how Reb Leibel used to spend a lot of time in my illustrious grandparents' house, Rabbi and Mrs. Elio Simpson. The Chabad world was very small back then. But I want to share one more connection that I have with the Bistritzky family. Rabbi Shlomo, should live and be well, had a very, very illustrious brother who was a friend and classmate of mine. Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky, Zechrono Livrocha. When we were 14 years old, we both went to Montreal to study. I went and he studied. And he studied. And he studied. And he studied. And no matter what time you came in, if we finished up our praying at 3 o'clock in the morning, we did a lot of that back then, but I never inhaled. Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky was studying. He was a genius. He was a scholar. And this is another special relationship. that I merited to have with the Bistritzky family. And so whenever I would see Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky, it was always, hey, how you doing? And all of that stuff. And he was a very, very special man, the head of a very special family. He will be missed, but just to paraphrase what Rabbi Brisky says, he's in the right place to bring down blessings for all of his loved ones, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, for all of the world, and to bring kindness and goodness, to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. Amen.
Amen.
Speaking of great-grandchild, we're going to ask Davi Greenwald to please come up. He's going to read a letter that he wrote to his great-grandmother, Rabbi Shlomo's mother.
Dear Bubby Bistritzky, it's been a couple of emotional and difficult weeks for me since Sadie passed away. As I think about it, many never get the opportunity to meet their great-grandparents, and those that do don't have a Sadie like I do. I just wanted to tell you that to have Sadie Bistritzky as my great-grandfather is a very big solace. Hearing the wonderful stories and knowing how close he was to the Rebbe is amazing. Zadie taught me to live every second of my life to its fullest. Shortcuts won't get me anywhere. I remember last summer, when I was visiting your house, Zadie asked me, when will you get new tzitzis? I guess they were not looking too new, even though they were in fairly good shape. This taught me that even the smallest things mattered. Zadie cared about doing things correct and wanted me to do the same. One of the most memorable times that I had with Zadie Bistritzky was when I got to spend Pesach with you and Zadie. I had the merit to go under Zadie's talis for Birkas Kohanim. Not too many people can brag about doing that. I'll forever cherish that experience, and from here on, every time I am under a talis for Birkas Kohanim, I'll think of Zadie. When we came to visit last summer, he showed us some of his farm. As my brother Yossi and I took interest, Zadie saw it and he gave us some of his own farm to keep. Zadie had a tremendous passion and love for his farm and learning. I hope to make him proud, you and him proud, with my learning too. It was my wish to have my bar mitzvah in Israel, so that my great-grandparents can join in. Our plans have not changed yet. My wish will still come true, and Zadie Bistritzky will still be there with me. It's only been a couple of weeks since he passed away, and I miss him very much. I know that just like you, many around the world miss him too. With hopes that we will be reunited with Zadie Bistritzky very soon with Mashiach, looking forward to seeing you soon.
Now I'd like to call upon Rabbi Yitz Weiss to say a few words about a different type of reflection, not from a family perspective, but from someone that was strongly influenced by Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky.
Standing here thinking about Leibel Bistritzky brings me back to one of the most fondest times in my life, and for good reason. And please indulge me for a minute. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I met a camp counselor who at the time was about 19 years old. You know him as Rabbi Shlomo. Back then we called him Shloimi. And I, gained a connection with him. Oddly enough, for some reason, I felt like after the summer was over, I needed to spend some more time with he and his family, who I had never met. And at the young age of 8 years old, my family thought it was wise to send me away for Yontif to New York. So they put me on a plane and sent me to New York to go stay with Shlomi and his family. Now, thinking back on it, at the time it made a lot of sense to me, but reflecting years later, a lot of things didn't make sense. First off, I don't know why my parents put me on a plane when I was so young. But what's most confusing, and now I understand it, is it didn't make any sense that a guy who was 18 or 19 years old at the time would be willing or have any interest in bringing a little kid to stay with his family for Yontif. I mean, a yeshiva student on vacation, he wanted to enjoy his time. It was Yontif, he wanted to have a good time with his family. Reflecting back on it many years later, I realized that the reason that it made so much sense and that he was willing to do it at the time is because his family was there, his parents were there, his father was there. And just to give you a few little insights in my own personal experience, when I arrived in New York for the first time at 8 years old, and I was picked up by Shlomi and his brother and taken back to their house, one of the first things that happened is I met Shlomi's father, Leibel, and he immediately took me to 770 where the Rebbe was giving out dollars. The men's turn for giving out dollars was already over, and it was now the women's turn. It was actually in the middle of 770, and we were, I think, the very last people in line. And I, as an 8-year-old boy, had no idea what I was doing, where I was going, but I knew that it was important. I'd heard about the Rebbe, and I learned about the Rebbe, but immediately, that's one of the first things that happened is we ran right in line. I got $1 and got to essentially meet the Rebbe for the very first time. Which is a big experience in my life that would be repeated, several times thereafter. But like Dovey, in his experience, I had a very similar experience to be able to be with your great-grandfather in 770 under his talus, when the Rebbe was in 770 during davening, be there for Birchas Kohanim. Many experiences and memories, too many that I can enumerate now, and don't want to bore you with all the details. But just one bit of information that just you need to know is just to reiterate what everyone else has said tonight. That a warm person, a giant of a person, but more so than anything, a person that in my life has probably made the biggest impression and the biggest impact to the point where I'm standing here today. Because without having those experiences and being able to be in his house for those several yontifs that I was there for 2 or 3 or 4 years in a row, where I just left my family back at home and moved into Shlomi's basement with some of his nephews and Ari and even Shlomi. My experiences in life would not be anywhere near the same, and it's because of that time that I spent with him there, where he took a great interest in me. For some reason, Shlomi will tell you, I was a kid with long hair and had a little Top Gun hat, and I used to walk around the streets of Crown Heights with Leibel Bistritzky walking down the streets, and he told everyone that I was his grandson. And the truth of the matter is, I have my own grandparents, thank God, may they be well, but I felt at that time, and still do, that he was essentially the same as my grandparents, and a grandfather to me too. And in his honor and his merit, I'm going to take upon myself to do an extra mitzvah every day, and I hope everybody else chooses to do the same.
We'd now like to ask the Associate Director of Chabad of the Valley and the spiritual leader of Chabad of Tarzana, and a close friend of the Bistritzky family, Rabbi Morty Einbinder, to say a few words.
I'm not used to public speaking like this. Tonight's gathering is very special because it brings to mind what the Rebbe said in a very famous letter to then General Ariel Sharon, may he have a complete recovery, when he witnessed and went through his own personal tragedy, terrible accident in the house with a teenage son, and he died tragically. And the Rebbe said to him, number one, thank you for putting on tefillin publicly. It created a unprecedented commotion and a groundswell of awakening in Israel. And the Rebbe said to him, in other words, if I could explain to you why this happened, this tragedy, I'd be a fool or a liar. And the Rebbe said the words that we say to people in mourning is Hamokim Yanachim Eschem B'Sech Shar Avei Tziv V'Shalayim. God should comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion, Jerusalem. The Rebbe asked, why does this take on these global reverberations of Zion and Jerusalem? It's a personal loss. It's an individualistic thing. And the Rebbe says that in times of joy, how much more so is this reality considerably compounded in a time of loss, that there is no such thing as lonely individuality, but every single Jew has to feel this deficiency, this aura of a succinct loss. I believe tonight, when we talk about Rabbi Shlomo, our dear friend, about the Bistritzkys, about the Greenwald family, we talk about people who had a giant of a man leave this world. And Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky embodied and personified seemingly antithetical attributes and opposing characteristics. He was a physical guy. You looked at him, you get scared. He'd run through a Fabrengen to get the phone when that solo phone would answer. Don't get in this man's way. Yet, he was a gentleman with faith of steel. He was overwhelmingly modest, if one can say that dichotomy. He was aggressive and strong in his gentle softness and kindness. This was a different type of a person. This was a person who inspired. We heard the words from Yitz Weiss. This was a man whose love was infectious and contagious, and it will endure as nothing less than legendary. The reality is that Rabbi Shlomo, who sits here, is a shliach of the Rebbe. What does that mean? That means he is here to serve and to defend all those he comes in contact with. So therefore, not in a philosophical overture, in a real, practical, down-to-earth way, everyone is experiencing to one level or one gradation, here or there, the loss of Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky. It's something that hits you right in the gut. I want to say to Rabbi Shlomo, to each and every one of us here, that the Rebbe taught us, the Rebbe inspired us, and the Rebbe showed us the living example that in a time such as this, a time when the Bistritzky family is confronted with this seemingly overwhelming, unparalleled darkness, the Rebbe said, transform pain into positivity and turn those tears into growth. Certainly the portals and vegetables of paradise are open wide to this very great man. We, as Chassidim of the Rebbe, all had a relationship with the Rebbe. Each and every one of you, even if you never physically met the Rebbe, you are connected to the Rebbe. But Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky were from those few rare individuals that the Rebbe was so close to. It was more than a Rebbe Chassid relationship. I dare say, on a very human, mortal level, when the Rebbe, so to speak, needed a friend or someone to depend upon, Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky was there. This is a family that when the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were stuck in Europe, and they were suffering Metzipornei Hanatzim, Yimach Shemam. How did they get to America? They had visas, but they had no passage. I believe it was the tickets of Reb Leibel Bistritzky's parents that ultimately saved the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin and changed the world forever, creating an unprecedented renaissance of Yiddishkeit. That's what's happening tonight in Westlake Village. Nothing less than the reflection, nothing less than the objective contemplation that we have lost a giant. And we need to each try to supplement and try to bring forth a sense of consolidation in this great deficiency that's felt here. I want to conclude tonight is the night, the 22nd of Sivan, that Miriam Hanaviah, the holy sister of Moses, was struck with tsaras. And it says in the Torah a week or two ago, V'ya'am lo nasa. The Jewish people did not travel forward. The Rebbe makes a point, what Rashi says, why did the nation not travel forward? Because Miriam Hanaviah had that advantageous faculty, had that inherent goodness, that when baby Moses his life was in danger, when the entire continuity of the Jewish nation was in a dangerous state, she stood there and she watched. She stood there to make sure nothing would happen to her baby brother. Because of that, the Jewish people remained in the desert, didn't move. The Rebbe adds to that, you don't have to be a Moses. It's a very famous letter to the Sheikh Chabad. You don't have to be an Aaron HaKohen for the Jewish people to take notice and for the entire nation to remain there, because Miriam Hanaviah got sick. So let us all put our shoulders to the wheel. Let us all understand that this family needs healing. They need our support. This entire organization of Chabad of the Kineo at this time needs the involvement of Balabatim to do another mitzvah, like he had said. Because, one more minute. When it was time for Eliyahu HaNavi to return his soul, his great chassid and student Elisha, who was no lightweight of his own, said, Rebbe, bestow upon me double your prophetic powers. And Eliyahu HaNavi said, it's not a problem. If you'll see me taken from you, so it will be. What kind of question is that? Double the prophetic powers of Eliyahu HaNavi, Elijah the prophet? Is that not a chutzpah? Is that not temerity? And Eliyahu HaNavi is very chilled, no problem. What does it mean if you see me taken from you? And if he doesn't see him taken from him, he won't get that blessing. Either he deserves it or he doesn't. And I believe the message is very clear, Rabbi Shlomo, our dear, dear friends. When a person's alive, it's very simple to behold them, to love them, to be connected to them. But this is the story of after Gimel Tammuz as well. After that person seems to not be here physically, will we continue in their ways? If you'll see me taken from you, even after I'm taken from you, so it will be. And as all the speakers before me said, there will be a continuity, a resiliency to the greatness that Reb Leibel Bistritzky represented. And may all of our efforts help consolidate that. Very, very soon, God will wipe away the tears from all the faces, and those who repose in the dust will awaken to stand up and sing forth the praise of Almighty God. May this great Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky be amongst them. Neshama Shevan Ali, Amen.
Amen. And I'd like to call upon Chanoch Bistritzky, followed by Mendy Bistritzky.
It is customary that after the passing of a loved one, you split up the entire Mishnayos, the texts of the Tanaim, starters of the oral Torah, for the elevation of the soul. So I will be finishing right now one tractate, and with that, we'll start whatever I'm going to want to say. I'll give an explanation. Madlikin shemen sreifa bevati knesiyos, uvevati midrashis, uvemvayis ha'afelin. You light the oil to be burnt. There was a certain present given to the Kohanim called Truma, 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th of your crop. Now this one, now oil, you can't eat it. What you do is they would burn it. So generally only Kohanim could burn it. But we're saying if it's done for public use in specific places, like a synagogue, a yeshiva, a place to learn, or even in a dark community area. If a woman who's not from a Kohanic family marries a Kohen, she could light her father, who is not a Kohen, can light this truma in his son-in-law's house. You could light it in a house where you're having a party, but not in a place of mourning. This is what Rabbi Yehuda says. Because when you're in Beis Ha'avel, you're going to accidentally use it improperly because you don't mind getting your clothes dirty. It's not a special place. It's a special place, so it's not a simcha place. Rabbi Yossi Eimer b'Beis Ha'avel, Avlei b'Beis Hamishter, Rabbi Meir Eiser kan v'kan. Rabbi Meir says both a mourning house and a party house are both, you can't light these truma. Rabbi Shimon Mater kan v'kan. Rabbi Shimon allows it both in these places. Salik Mesachtes Trumas. Rabbi Chanani ben Akash Eimer Ezer Kadosh Baruch Hu. We're not going to say one Kaddish as we finish the Masechta.
Iskada v'iskada shmei Rabbi V'oma divrach Yerusei B'yamlich malchusei Yatzmach burkanei v'karei Mashiachei Chayei chayinu v'yimei chayinu v'chayei dechol Beis Yisrael Ba'agol v'zman kari v'imru amei Shmei Rabbi Barach V'olam V'omel Maya Yisbarech v'yishtabach v'yisbarech v'yisherman v'yisnasei V'yisador v'yisale v'yisalo Shmei dekutra brichu Le'ela min kol v'chasa v'shirasa Tushb'chasim nechamasa damin ba'oma v'imru amei Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidein v'al kol Tamidei Samidein Yal kol mandaskim b'iraisa diva asra dein v'di b'chol asar v'asar Yehei lahayin ulachayin shlam rabach yina b'chisda V'rachamin v'chayin arichin u'mezayin revicha U'for kanim in kadam abo in the Bishmaya v'imru amei Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya v'chayin tevim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amei Aisa shalom b'imroimov hu yasa shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amei
To maybe connect this Mishnah with the life and legacy of my grandfather, I'll proceed with the story of the third Chabad Rebbe named the Tzemach Tzedek and his relationship with his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, as he was an orphan as a young child. He was one time sitting on the famous Alter Rebbe's lap. The Alter Rebbe was playing with his grandson. And he told him, Mendel, where's Zaidi? Where's your grandfather? So he says, points to him. He says, no, that's not your grandfather. Points to his nose. That's not your grandfather. He points to his head. The famous head of the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe says, no, that's not your grandfather. So Tzemach Tzedek, who was destined to become one of the Chabad Rebbeim, who are not known for their lack of intellect, but a smart bunch, he pretended to get hurt. He pretended to bang his leg, his head. He covered himself as if there was an owl. His grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, put on a face of worry, something like this. And right when the Alter Rebbe did this, the Tzemach Tzedek pointed to him and said, there's Zaidi. The message is that man is made up of body and soul. And since man is made up of body and soul, there are two ways to relate to a man. A bodily physical connection and a soul connection. What does that mean? Now, when someone passes on, you see many people do different things. People, a lot of times when they want to connect, they had a nice movie they liked watching with their loved one. They're going to rewatch that movie, relive memories. Another thing they could do is their loved one started a business. They're going to continue his legacy. That's a bodily connection. In a bodily connection, if I'm relating to what my loved one enjoyed to do on a physical basis, I could either relate to his past experiences, or I could continue his future. But where can I continue a relationship in the present? And the answer to that is a soul connection. A soul connection means that what your grandfather enjoyed doing wasn't for any sort of benefit that he would be gaining in his body. Soul connection means what he would be doing for God, what he would be doing simply because of the fact that he was a Jew. When you do that, you're not only connecting to your loved one in the past, not only in the future. Yes, you're doing that also, but you're connecting in the present. It's something that supersedes any bodily connection. And with this, we could connect it simply, possibly, to the Mishnah we're learning. A soul is compared to oil. Like oil with all other liquids, oil always rises to the top. The soul is non-contaminated by daily lusts and desires. It always rises to the top and has never been touched. So what our Mishnah is really asking is, when can I burn this oil? When do I actually see a soul passion? I see my loved one all the time. How can I know to differentiate? And the Mishnah mentions 3 places like we said before. Batei Knesiot, a shul, a synagogue. Someone's come to shul over there. You're not seeing any business, no self-interest. What you're seeing is a burning passion for God. Bati Midrasha, so yeshiva. Someone putting aside his day, an hour of his day, as known my grandfather, Alav Shalom, he used to go when the Rebbe established that people should learn 3 chapters of Rambam, of Maimonides. He used to show up many times due to late hours after working and starting Hatzalah, which was an emergency outreach in Crown Heights. Sometimes he'd fall asleep. Many of us, after falling asleep day after day in a class, might stop going. Every single day he went. I don't think every day he fell asleep, but this was something that meant something to him. As was mentioned also earlier, the Svarim that he loved. Over there you also see not only a bodily passion, over there you see a soul passion, Bati Midrashos. What's the third one? The third one was a public place. Nothing to do with any holiness, seemingly. That's exactly the point. You don't need to be Superman, super soul, to be a soul person. Helping someone out in the most basic sense. There's a dark alley. Shine a light over there. Help him out. That's the third place you could find a soul. A basic lesson we could all take to give over to the rest of our family, and an impression we could give off to the world, is we shouldn't just be remembered by the businesses we run, by the past we leave over. We should be remembered in a way that our loved ones could tap into us by the present. Remember our prayer, remember our limud Torah, and remember the good things we did on a public basis. May exile end. Amen. Amen.
Now, Brother Mandy Bistritzky. Those that are standing in the backyards, chairs available up front, so please don't be bashful. It's not good for your back to stand for so long. Come on down. All right, we tried.
Okay, this might take me a little while, so please just bear with me. I didn't want to, but I'm going to have to start with this week's Parsha. And this week's Parsha, like Reb Bistritzky said, speaks about the Meraglim, the spies. The spies that Moshe said, right? So God told the Jews, you go into Israel and I'll help you conquer the land. So the Jews said, we want to check out the land. So Moshe said, fine, we'll send spies to prove to the Jews the quality, the beauty of the land. That was the job of the spies. To go scout the land and to show then to look at the beauty of the land and the fruits, the vegetables, vegetation, etc. And to come back and tell the Jews all about it, where they were destined to live. And on this pasuk, on this verse, the Mefarish, the commentary, the Seforno states, he says that Moshe chose those who were the best agriculturally in knowing the land, knowing how to plant, how to sow, etc. So, I know you all know, and it also says that he chose men of valor, righteous people. But we all know that 10 out of 12 of them failed. They came back and they gave a report, not about only the land. They said the land is a good land. But they spoke about the great giants who were there, the enemies, the different enemies, that were in Israel. It got all the Jews scared. So, the very simple question, I was reading this, I was wondering, these were men of valor. What happened to them? Right? God says, I'm going to go into the land, I'll help you conquer. What happened to them? All of a sudden they forget their God, righteousness. They don't believe that God, they just saw God take them out of Egypt. So I was saying this, and I was wondering that maybe they got so caught up with themselves in the mission that they kind of forgot the mission wasn't about them. They were supposed to lead the mission, they were supposed to be part of the mission. It wasn't about them. The goal of the mission was just to go and scout the beauty of the land. But who did Moshe choose? People who knew the agriculture. And they said, okay, we were chosen for our milas, for our capabilities, for our understanding of the land. And therefore we're going to come back, and now we're coming with our understanding. We're getting all caught up in this, and we'll speak about the land. There's enemies, there's giants, etc. So, being that they got so caught up in their milas and what they had to offer, I guess they kind of forgot about the whole godly factor here, the whole godly aspect in this. And if there's one thing, looking back at my grandfather, that just screams out at me, I guess, is that with all his miles, with all his capabilities, abilities, everything he had, everything he owned, he knew what it was for. He knew it was all created for us, but it wasn't about us. There's something greater here. There's a God to serve, and how to do that with everything we have. One second, sorry. Yeah. And I was I don't know, a week and a half ago, whatever it was, my father showed me a picture of my grandfather on his phone, an iPad, whatever it was. And I saw a picture of my grandfather running on a call. I saw a call, the emergency Chabad ambulance organization that he created. He's running with his big white beard, like a big chassid, with a dark blue shirt and a cigarette in his mouth. And the first thing I thought was he's so cool. It's not your average thought about a grandfather, but it was never, everyone's saying he's so humble, he's so this, he's that. It was never really about him having to offer. He just, I guess, did whatever he had to do. I was in such a sensitive way. I was, after he passed away, so people come over to me, condolences, whatever. So there's a man in yeshiva, he's in a wheelchair, unfortunately. And he came over to me and he said, when I used to live in New York, I used to drive over to Crown Heights for the Rebbe's Farbrengens when he used to talk, to give the lectures, whatever it is. So he said he used to drive up to Crown Heights, in front of 770. A grandfather would walk out, wheel him, and somehow get him from point A to point B. Just drive through it. Just do what he had to do. Help a fellow. And another person, I was in one of the shuls, the synagogues in LA, and someone else went up to me and said, "Your grandfather's a special man. You don't know how many times he saved my mother's life." And with you, it's the sensitivity you have to have for an 8, 9-year-old to walk him around and to say he's my grandson, take him under your wing. I guess it's a big thing. And on the way here, I was actually reading a story about my grandfather. And he used to have his store on the Lower East Side, or whatever it is. I don't know, I think so. And I'm the younger of the bunch. And he says that the guy who's writing, he says that he remembered his grandfather was once in the Lower East Side, I don't know, fundraising for a yeshiva or something. And this guy grandfather looks behind him and he sees these two big guys, Latino guys, whatever it was, some other, yeah. And they were starting to walk fast after this big rabbi of a yeshiva. So this big rabbi started running. So my grandfather looks out of his store, and he sees this big rabbi running. Now, usually big rabbis don't run. It's a rule. And he sees this rabbi running, so something was fishy, and he looks, and then he sees these two big guys chasing after him. So my grandfather, it says in the story, he took his 10-inch cheese knife, whatever it was, and he starts chasing after these two Latino guys. And I guess really, at the end of the day, that's I heard it. In order to be truly free at sea, you have to be a slave to the compass. And everything you see around us, just give it over and whatever. And I was telling my teacher, someone I'm close with yesterday, that I'm going to this event with my grandfather, and so I was asked to say something. So he said, "There's a letter," and the Rebbe, all the Rebbe's letters, most of them are written in a book, compiled in different sections. So he told me there's a letter in it's called the Igris in the book of Rebbe's Book of Letters, that it has no name at the beginning of the letter who it's addressed to. Some of them do, some of them don't. But he told me he knows, I don't know how, he knows that it's addressed to my great-grandfather. And the premise or the base of this letter was that my great-grandfather was not Chabad, he wasn't Lubavitch. And my grandfather started becoming close. Now, my great-grandfather wanted my grandfather to become close to Chabad, but not a Lubavitch Chassid per se. From that side, I don't blame him. And so my grandfather was at the Fabrengen. I'm kidding. And my grandfather was at the Fabrengen. And the Rebbe looks at him and he says, in front of everyone, I think it was in front of everyone, and he says, "Tell your father that I know he's a chassid inside, he should bring it out, because his kids are already chassidim. His kids are already chassids. And he should become an extra chassid on the outside also, and then help his kids become a chassid on the outside." I have a letter here, and when the Rebbe defines a chassid, so first he says, I'll quote, Several times I heard my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, speak about you and your wife, and the extent of the energy he devoted to you and your wife directly, through speaking to you, and indirectly in his own ways, by reciting a capital to Tehillim, chapter of Tehillim, etc. This is being said to my great-grandfather. I also heard from my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, about the hopes he had for your children. We see with our physical eyes how slowly they are fulfilling these hopes more and more. At the end of the letter, the Rebbe writes, "One of the fundamental thrusts of this blessing, to be Chassidim, is to conduct oneself beyond the measure of the law, and to perform a favor for one's fellow man, even if doing so harms one. As Tosfos says what the term Chassid is, with good wishes to all the members of your household and with blessing." And I mean, that seems like it was destined to do since the beginning, and it looks like he fulfilled it to the fullest. And so when, next time I go to Israel, go visit my grandmother, I'm not going to see my grandfather. Like Chanuk was saying, everyone has this desire to immortalize themselves. With a building, with artwork, with a song, with something. And I really don't think my grandfather ever had that desire. I can't see it. But I think he has the biggest immortality, whatever the word is, immortalness, that anyone can ever have. He lived to see children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren. And that's something really special that really shows on someone that continuity. People who are going to live, give over his message. Everything he was all about, which was the message of bring God into the world. And that's a big thing of keeping him immortal. Just all of us, I guess, just making this place a better place, like he did, in a much greater way than probably I'll ever do. But just do whatever we can and make this place godly, and hopefully we'll bring Mashiach, and we'll be reunited with my grandfather very speedily in our days. Amen. Amen.
Before I call upon Rabbi Shlomo to address this large assembly, we didn't have the opportunity to go visit him during Shiva, as it was in Eretz Yisrael, and it was actually only for a very, very short period. So for all of us here, this is our opportunity to give comfort to the mourner who is now at the Shloshim point. I'm reminded of a very simple, short story that I heard from my father. When my father and Rabbi Bistritzky's father were young, they would study together. And they would learn at Rabbi Gordon's grandfather's shul in Borough Park. It was called Simpson Shul. And the two of them would have regular scheduled time that they would get together and study. It was at the time, you heard Rabbi Gordon mention of Rabbi Shlomo's brother, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky, was born. And the Lubavitch Rebbe was aware of this shir that would take place between my father and Shlomo's father. And so he let it be known to Rabbi Leibel Bistritzky that it would be a good idea if they would bring the baby in a carriage into the shul so that he should sit by as the two would study together every day. From early on, the Rebbe realized that this scholar, as Rabbi Gordon called him at the age of 14, would need to have the learning start from infant age on. This was always something that I remember my father telling me. It's sad for us, but I guess happy for them up above, that the three are able to continue their shir today up above in heaven. I'm sure they remembered where they left off, and they continue to study together every single day. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Shlomo Bistritzky.
I'm going to try. First and foremost, despite the sadness, I feel it is very appropriate to begin by thanking Hashem for giving me the merit and honor to be my father's son. I'd also like to take a moment when Jews gather together. There's a special power. So I'd like to ask all of you to have in your hearts a prayer for my mother, for Rabbi Brisky's mother, for Rebitz and Leah Levine's mother. We all lost our fathers in the course of 2 years or so. For all those in the room here who have loved ones that have passed, that God should give them the strength to move forward the way our sages have taught us, to channel our pain, to channel our sadness, and to continue to influence the world around them in good health and for many years to come. Amen. On behalf of Tovi and myself, our children, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. You know, I'm number 9 of 10 children. We don't get together that often. And my father got us together in the Holy Land a few weeks ago. And you would think that it felt whole. I even had my wife with me there. But it's amazing what happens when you live somewhere for all these years and you're involved in a beautiful community like this. You all become family. And I don't say that lightly. You truly become family. And as much as I would rather be right now getting a root canal than standing up here and being in this position, I'm humbled by the outpouring of love. And I thank God and I thank the Rebbe for sending me to such a beautiful community with wonderful rabbis and rebbitzins and the people that God has sent into our lives. You bring us great comfort. Thank you. I have a correction to make. Everyone referred to my father as a rabbi. And if he was here right now, he would get up and make sure I correct him, so I'm going to do it. My father was not a rabbi. He was never ordained as a rabbi, refused to be acknowledged as a rabbi. As Rabbi Brisky said, he would either call himself Leibel the cheese man or Leibel the grocer, or from Rabbi Gordon's times, Leibel the farmer. And I say this
not to be silly or funny or light. But you see, I had an ulterior motive in asking for this memorial tonight. And those of you that know me well know I'm very transparent, for the good or for the bad. And I had an ulterior motive. My ulterior motive was to make sure you leave here changed people. Because this is the only thing that interested my father. Not his bio, not bragging about him, no big pictures of him. He was a man of action. To the point where I think he made sure to organize that he should pass away at a time where we would only get 12 hours of shiva for him, so we wouldn't sit and brag about him. Although I'll need therapy for the rest of my life because of it. When we hear stories about great people, there's something we all need to remember. It's one of my favorite sayings in the world. And in hindsight, probably because it reflects on my father. Heroes are not extraordinary people. Heroes are ordinary people that do extraordinary. That was my father. As you heard earlier from Rabbi Gordon, my father was a farmer. He had a chicken farm. He didn't sit in a yeshiva all day studying Talmud at candlelight. One of my favorite stories as a kid is listening to how my father went up on the roof one day to fix the barn, and there was a weak spot in the roof, and he fell in, and he had to hang there all day until my mother came home from teaching. Or on another Friday afternoon, my father, in collecting hundreds of eggs from the pen. Thank God I grew up after the farm, so I don't even know the right terminology. My father was on his way to put away the eggs for Shabbos and did not realize while holding baskets of eggs that my brother Levi of blessed memory left his roller skates at the top of the stairs. And the sound my mother heard, she said she will never forget. And the scene she saw minutes before candle lighting on Shabbos with my father buried under hundreds of eggs. My father was a regular Joe. And I say that with admiration and respect. Heroes are ordinary people that do extraordinary things. When opportunity came where he was able to move back to Crown Heights to be near the Rebbe, understand, my father grew up in a home amongst different Hasidim, and my grandfather was considered royalty there. And as a teenager, my father met the Rebbe and was exposed to Hasidic principles and teachings, and he found his home. And he left the honor and respect he would get in his community and become an individual boy without any family in Crown Heights, just to be near his Rebbe and just to learn the Hasidus of Chabad, the principles of channeling every opportunity one has in bringing every Jew closer to God and to care for every Jew unconditionally. He opened a store on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. His original address was 27.5 Essex Street, and the half was no mistake. It was a half a store. The entire store was maybe the size of this front section until the Mechitza, but he touched thousands of people in that store. It was a real Chabad house. And many, many stories. I only heard recently one of my father chasing two guys down the street with a 10-inch cheese knife, but there were many, many stories of kindness and inspiration that came out of that store. He had a grocery store, and he stood on his feet all day long. He did not sit in yeshiva studying Talmud. But he made sure that every moment counted and that every person that came into his life was there for a reason, and he was willing to give them everything. Which probably explains why there's no inheritance for me. My father is actually in the movie Crossing Delancey. How many of you have seen that movie, Crossing Delancey? So the pickle guy in the movie was right next door to my father,
and they saw this man with this long white beard running around schlepping boxes and all that, and the I guess director, whatever it was, came over and asked him if he'd walked by a few times. So he's actually in the movie Crossing the Landsea. If you blink, you miss it, but he's in the movie. He never saw the movie. But he was a regular Joe. He wanted to be known as Leibel. He was like each and every one of you in this room. Nothing more, nothing less, and he wanted you to know it. But he lived by the principle that the Rebbe inspired within him, that every moment and every person really matters. His slogan was, "I can, therefore I must." That was my father's simple slogan in life. If the opportunity comes my way, I have to take it. To the extent that my brother sent me a Facebook post last week that someone sent him, that another person who we don't know posted on Facebook, that he was walking down the street in Brooklyn and he came across a pickle store that said, from the original makers of Gus's Pickles on the Lower East Side. Knowing my father had just passed away, he went in and asked, "Did you know Leibel Bistritzky?" To which the pickle man said, "Of course, how is he?" And this is all in his Facebook post. He writes that he told him that my father passed away a couple days ago. And he says, standing over barrels of pickles, I watched a grown man start crying over someone he hasn't seen in over 17 years. That's the influence one has, ordinary people have, when they realize that their responsibility in this world is to be extraordinary. I grew up in a house that my mother prepared. One of the observations my wife made when she came to my parents the first time was that all the pots and pans looked like, in her world, like they were jacuzzis. We had restaurant kitchen equipment. And she couldn't understand why. But you see, Friday night in my house, the way it worked was every inch of the table was set for a guest. But we were no reservations. My father would go to shul and pick out some young yeshiva boys who were studying in 770 from Israel, from Europe, and would say, "If you want a hot meal, meet me outside 770 right after services and bring some friends." And sometimes it was 8, and sometimes it was 15 people. And when Saturday night came, my mother would then stand on her feet and recook and send food on Saturday nights and on Thursday nights to the local yeshiva. It's interesting, I just remembered my father, I'll never forget this. I was in his car with him, and he stopped and he bought cases of toilet paper. And I didn't get it because my family would still be using that amount of toilet paper. And on the way home, he stopped on Kingston Avenue, corner President Street, and he said, "Wait here." He didn't ask me to do it. And he left, and he came back with some yeshiva guys. They opened his van, and they took the toilet paper out. I said, "Tom, what was that all about?" He says, "I once heard 2 yeshiva boys talking about the conditions in the dorm and how they don't even have toilet paper, so every few weeks I pick up cases of toilet paper." His children were not studying there. His grandchildren were not in the dorm. But he heard there was a need, and my father went out and did it, and he did not have the financial resources. But he was taught that a person comes into this world to do potentially just one favor for somebody, and he lived with that principle every single day. 2 months ago, I got to be in Israel, and I asked my father about the source of a strange custom he had. You see, every Friday night in a big community, well, there's a tradition that when a newborn baby boy is welcomed into this world, the Shabbat before the bris, the family on Friday nights makes a shalom zacher. And my father, growing up,
no matter how tired he was. Now understand, I'm number 9 of 10 children. So my childhood was more with a grandfather than a father. He was not a young man. And every Friday night, he never made it through the meal without falling asleep. Where's Yitz? He would remember this. My father's standard position halfway through the meal was chin down, sleeping. Yet he would wake up for benching, for the grace after meals, which he repeated about 5 times because he couldn't remember where he was at when he fell asleep each time. And he would go to every Shalom Zacher in the community, people he knew and people he did not know. And I recently, only after all these years, I said, "Ta, where did this tradition start?" I thought there was something profound. Maybe the Rebbe once told him to do it. And he said to me, I worked very hard, long hours, and never got to celebrate the people in the community's celebrations. Weddings, bar mitzvahs, I was always working. The one night a week that I was able to truly be there for other people and celebrate their joyous occasions was Friday night. So I made a promise to myself that I will go to every Shalom Zacher. So imagine a man in his 60s standing on his feet 12, 15 hours a day. And the one night he gets to relax. He went on, by the way, New York is not Southern California. Snow, rain, hot, cold. People he knew and people he didn't know. Because he was taught that we're all connected and we're all responsible for each other. And being there for happy occasions was as important to him as being there for people in time of need. One of the things he's most famous for is, you may have heard a few people mention already, something called Hatzalah. In the early 70s, a Hasidic Jew in Crown Heights had a heart attack, and the New York City ambulance service did not get there in time, and the man died. And my father swore he would never let it happen again. Not because his father was a doctor or he had medical training. He was a chicken farmer and a grocer. But he took a course to become an EMT, an emergency medical technician. He heard of a Hasidic Jew in Williamsburg, and that had done the same thing. He called him, and together they started building an organization called Hatzalah, which is a first responder system for the community. Williamsburg and Crown Heights. What did that mean back then? There were no cell phones. Even the pagers with the digital message didn't exist. You got beeped, you had to call a number and get a message. So my father took the back of his van, he bought an ambulance stretcher, and with belts and rope he tied it. And he wasn't a sailor, so the knots were not very strong. To the back of his van, and he gave out stickers. You remember the stickers, the neon stickers that everyone should put on their phones. And you call the number would beep him, he would have to stop and find the payphone, call the payphone, call and find out that someone passed out somewhere in Brooklyn, and he would run with his van. After 12, 15-hour days in his store, a family of 10 children, which is probably why he did it, he didn't want to put us to bed, and run around at his own cost, no money, put people on the stretcher if they needed it, administer CPR, save their life, get them to a hospital, not come home after the hospital because he went back to the families and made sure that they understood that the condition was good, or if God forbid it wasn't, that he should be there for them. I called the headquarters of Hatzalah this morning, and I asked for someone to speak to. I wanted information. And when I said my name, it was silent on the other end. And finally she said, "Are you CH5's son?" That was my father's code, because years later, it went from pagers to cell phones, raised money to buy an ambulance, got a permit to drive the ambulance, and he started building this organization. 2 Jews, scraggly beards, from 2 sides of Brooklyn, just with a sense of responsibility to their fellow brothers and sisters. And when she stopped crying and consoling me, she knew my father very well for many years. I asked her for the statistics of what the Hatzalah organization in New York is today. Started by these 2 simple guys. Today there's over 1,200 paramedics and EMTs around the tri-state area. No charge. They don't make a salary, they each have a day job. There's over 85 ambulances in the tri-state area. And they service 55,000 calls a year, of which 28,000 need to be transported for emergency help in the hospital. Their response time is leaps and bounds faster and better than the ambulance system in New York. And they save thousands of lives every month. This is an organization that Leibel the Cheese Man decided that he's going to start because somebody, not a relative, but somebody died because people were not there to help. Imagine how many people are impacted with this every single day today. Because heroes are ordinary people that choose to do extraordinary things. My father decided to retire to Israel. You know, I'm scared to change barbers, and him at the age of 70 or 71, he picks up and he moves to the Holy Land, smack in middle of Jerusalem. So you'd think he'd start taking it easy. Both my mother and father's feet caused them great, great problems and pain because of all the hours they stood on their feet. Terrible circulation problems. And you would think it would be time for them to take it easy. My father, as soon as he got there, he and my mother volunteered in a local hospital 3 or 4 days a week for 4 hours on their feet, going room to room to comfort the families of the patients. If that wasn't enough, when he saw the poverty, he decided to start a free loan society, offering people interest-free loans for a year so that they could make a wedding or pay for food. And by the way, for those of you who have been in Jerusalem, if you offer free loans to Jews in Jerusalem, my father, his door was constantly open to the point where us as children used to threaten, doesn't pay for us to come visit because we never get to see you. Because the door basically was a revolving door of Jews in need. He gave every person that knocked on the door, every person, between 10 and 20 a day, he gave them a donation. When I would jump up, or my siblings would jump up to answer the door, my father would get upset, tell us to go back to the kitchen, till his last day, by the way. 86-year-old man, because he wanted to hand them the tzedakah themselves and do it with dignity. Right before Passover, my father was very tired, and my brother saw him taking a stack of envelopes and heading downstairs, and my brother said, "Where are you going?" He says, "I want to put this in the mail." He says, "I can do it for you." He says, "No, I'll take care of it myself." He says, "What is it, and why are you in a rush to get it out?" He says, "It's letters I received from people asking for donations." So my brother told him, "It's late. Can't it wait till tomorrow?" And my father says, "I'm scared I'm going to forget tomorrow, and these are people in need, and every day matters to them. And I want to make sure I don't forget, so I'm going to put in the mail today." This is a giant of a man, but saw himself as an average Joe. I came to visit my parents the first time in Israel. And I was there myself. My parents had moved there like a year before. And it's Friday afternoon and we're heading to Shul. We come downstairs. And in Jerusalem, I know you're going to find this very interesting. There's actually a lot of Jews in Jerusalem. Thousands of them walking all around, especially Friday evening, all dressed up in the fur hats, all types. And my father and I leave the apartment to go walk what should take 10 to 15 minutes to get to the local Chabad shul. And as soon as we get out to the street, my father sees a Hasidic Jew walk by, and he stops him. He says, "Why can't you say Good Shabbos to another Jew?" And I want to bury myself anywhere I can. And the guy looks at him and says, "I'm sorry." He says, "Another Jew, say Good Shabbos." I'm like, "Ta, You're not going to change him. And my father did this to the point, and I'm talking here about my father at a memorial. I won't exaggerate, but it took at least 2 to 3 times the time to walk to shul, because he did this to anyone that did not say good Shabbos. Now you have to understand, my father, as the rabbi said here, big guy, long white beard flowing, walked with purpose. He was a bulldozer. So he comes at you and says, "Why can't you say good Shabbos?" You took him seriously. Anyways, as we got close to shul, I said to him, "Tai, you're not going to change Jerusalem. They're not going to change. Why do you aggravate yourself?" He says, "People have to know to be a mensch." That was the end of the conversation. I very rarely challenged my father on anything. That was probably as far as I ever did. A year later, I came with my wife and children for Pesach. And it's Erev Pesach or Friday night, whatever it was, and we come downstairs to go to shul, and I tell myself, oh boy, here we go again. True story. We come outside, and before we hit the curb, I hear someone scream, "Good Shabbos, Reb Leibel." My father says, "Good Shabbos." 2 seconds later, "Good Shabbos, Reb Leibel." About 5, 6 people do this, and my father looks at me with a smirk. I was sure he didn't remember this at all. And he looks at me, and in his way, he knew how to, get to me. And he says, "And you thought you can change Jerusalem." One man. And look how many things he accomplished. Look how many Jews he touched. He did not have the financial means. He did not have the time. 10 children, over 50 grandchildren, over 100 great-grandchildren. And he lived recently to see his first 2 great-great-grandchildren. But if he had $1 and someone needed it, he gave the $1 away. And whether he had the time or not, if someone needed him, even if they didn't know they needed him, he found the time and he found the resources, to the point where today thousands of Jews, it says if you save one Jew, it's as if you saved an entire world. Think about how many lives are saved every day by this one man. His greatest hobby and interest and passion, I know you're going to say probably me as children, I'm not so sure, but his greatest passion was his Rebbe. My father, from the moment he met the Rebbe, his soul became bound up in the Rebbe's soul. For those of you that have lost loved ones, you can relate when I say that pictures are from the strongest sources of comfort and inspiration. And I have lots of beautiful pictures of my father, but one that was sent to me a couple weeks ago has become my favorite. Not because my father's beard was brushed neatly, or because he was in a suit and tie, or even smiling. You see, it's a picture of my father in a hospital bed on Passover a couple months ago. He had pneumonia, and they put him in the hospital for 2 days. And it's one of his grandchildren took a picture of him in his hospital robe, laying in bed, studying what we Hasidim refer to as his Dvar Malchus. There's a daily portion of learning that the Rebbe inspired his Hasidim to do, because the Rebbe did not want us only out there being community activists, but he wanted us tied and tethered to Torah and Hasidic teachings. So he wanted, on top of everything your local Chabad rabbis do, he wanted them every day to make sure that they actually remain people of the book as well, as they say, to study Torah and to remain connected to God's Torah and Hasidus. And my father, whether he was in a hospital or just drove round trip from Jerusalem to Tzfat and back, falling asleep at the kitchen table, never thought for a moment of going to sleep before finishing all his study, because this is what his Rebbe demanded of him. Now, I didn't share all these stories with you to tell you how good of a guy my dad is. I actually was very uncomfortable with the idea of tonight's event. Don't like being on the receiving end, although I appreciate it, of kindness and compassion. It's much more comfortable being on the giving end, and I hope to remain there for many years to come. And I couldn't quite put my arm around what my father would want me to do at such a memorial. Talking about him seems very unnatural. He wouldn't want it. And if in some way I upset him, I ask his forgiveness tonight. I share this with you because, you know, rabbis, we have the microphone, so our misery becomes your misery. I read an interesting tradition that mourners are supposed to do for the first year. When they refer to their loved one, to their parent, in writing, maybe even when spoken, they're supposed to write 3 Hebrew letters. Hey, Kaf, Mem. Hareini Kaparas Mishkavoy. I am, loosely translated, I am in the place of the one who passed away. When I read it, it shook me to my core. It has since inspired me. I think of what the Rebbe wanted. I think about how the Rebbe channeled his sadness. I think about my father, the man of action, the hero that he was, and it becomes clear to me what I'm supposed to do. So for those of you that keep asking, let me tell you something. Yes, I am terribly sad. Today I couldn't function, but I will be okay. Because we're taught, as Rabbi Morty mentioned before, to take that sadness and to harness it and to convert it and transform it into positive energy. And the way I want to do that tonight is to ask each and every one of you not to leave here with compassion for me. It's nice. I want you each to leave here tonight and realize that you are the heroes of our children and grandchildren. The day will come, not to be morbid, but to make my point, because my father was a very blunt man. You know how they say it's never too late? Ladies and gentlemen, standing at my father's bedside as he took his last breath, I can honestly tell you, comes a point where it's too late. Grab the moment, seize the moment, and start making a difference today. Start making a difference in the community, in your own families, amongst your friends. Study more Torah, light Shabbat candles, not only because of the candles. When people ask me where my father found his strength, you know what I tell them? It was a byproduct. It wasn't a strategy. It was a byproduct of what happens to a Jew that internalizes the message of Torah. When a Jew internalizes the idea that they are a soul brought into this world to make a difference, that is the result you get. Someone that just does not see any limits whatsoever when it comes time to helping another Jew. And whatever principles and values that Torah demands of you, they're just non-negotiable. Every one of us have the power to make that same difference. I urge you, if there's something you want to know what you can do for me, is make a commitment tonight to strengthen your Judaism, to strengthen your connection with your family and those in your lives that you should strengthen that relationship, whatever the situation. Do something in memory of my father, Yehuda Leib ben Mordechai. As I said before, Hareini Kaparas Mishkavai. May God, I'm going to share something very personal with you right now. But the Rebbe says about positive times, when one makes a resolution, they should do it publicly so that others will hear it and challenge you and remind you constantly of that resolution. So in that spirit, as shliach of the Rebbe, as rabbi, as husband, son, and father, and friend, I resolve to try and live up to the great and mighty, awesome hero, an ordinary fellow who made it an extraordinary life. In my connection to my Rebbe and everything he demands of me as his emissary, and in every other way that a Jew should live every day. Just like the Rebbe made it a turning point in Chabad when the Rebbitzin passed away and taught us what we're supposed to do with our grief. I stand here today and say that I take upon myself that same resolution to learn from our Rebbe and how one is supposed to react during such times. And I hope to be able to make the Rebbe and my father very, very proud. And I look forward to doing this together with my fellow rabbis and Rebbitzins. God should give them the strength and the resource they need to continue to do all those things that the Rebbe demanded of us, because he had a very high standard. And I challenge each and every one of you to join our hands, link up together, and make this that special community, not just with one or two heroes, but in a community of heroes, doing extraordinary things to continue to build a beacon of light of God's Torah and its principles and values in how we treat each other here in the Caneo Valley, where may we make the Rebbe, may we make God very proud, and in return with all those great giants that God has recruited up in heaven, and have them look down upon us and pray on our behalf, and hopefully make enough noise up there that God should end this bitter exile and send us Mashiach Tzidkenu immediately, where we will be reunited with our loved ones. And let us all say Amen. Amen. Please stay. We need a few minions for Kaddish and the evening service. Again, on behalf of Tovi, my children, myself, thank you very much. May we share each other for Simchas, to see each other for Simchas. Amen. Amen.
There'll be a minion inside the shul. There'll be a minion outside on the patio as well.